Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Three months ago, I was living my best life. I had just moved to Boston for a great job opportunity in software development, and I was genuinely excited about starting fresh in a new city. I had it all planned out, join some local hiking groups, maybe take some cooking classes, basically anything that would help me meet new people. I even got a membership at this amazing rock climbing gym near my apartment. Then life decided to throw me a curveball. One morning I bent down to tie my shoes, and something in my back just gave out. The pain was excruciating. After multiple doctor visits and MRI scans, they found I had herniated 2 discs in my lower back. Just like that, my plans for an exciting new life crumbled. Instead of exploring the city and meeting new people, I found myself confined to my tiny apartment, barely able to move. The worst part? I needed a walker just to get around. Me, a previously active 28-year-old, using a walker like I'm 3 times my age. The only people I regularly interact with now are my doctors, my physical therapist, and the friendly door staff at my building. They're nice, but it's not exactly the social life I had imagined. Today I was sitting in the lobby of my physical therapist's office, which they share with an urgent care clinic. I always arrive early because I'm paranoid about traffic making me late. Plus, with the walker, everything takes twice as long anyway. I had my Nintendo Switch with me and was quietly playing Hello Kitty Island Adventure. No sound, just minding my own business. That's when this guy walks in. Despite the lobby being practically empty with plenty of space between chairs, he decides to plant himself right next to me. I could literally feel his presence invading my personal bubble. He started making small talk about the nasty weather we were having. I just gave him a short, yeah, without looking up from my game. He continued on about the snow from last night, to which I only responded with a simple, When he asked if I'd been waiting long for urgent care, I briefly mentioned I was there for physical therapy, still hoping he'd take the hint. I kept my eyes glued to my game, but he just kept leaning closer, practically breathing down my neck while I played. Then he looked at my screen, and I saw his face crunch up in judgment. He had the nerve to comment that what I was playing was a kid's game, and pointed out condescendingly that I wasn't a little girl. Something in me snapped. 3 months of pain, isolation, and frustration came bubbling to the surface. I told him off, explaining how I'd moved here as a fit person excited to meet new people before my back injury changed everything. I described how I now lived in a city without friends or family, with only my doctors, physical therapist, and building door staff for company. I let him know about my constant pain for the past 3 months and how I went from being reasonably healthy to needing a walker just to cross my tiny 400 square foot apartment to use the bathroom. I finished by telling him that he'd have to excuse me if the only thing I had the mental energy for was a silly little kid's game, and sarcastically apologized that we couldn't all do whatever super interesting things he does in his spare time. He quickly gathered his things and moved to the furthest corner of the lobby, suddenly very interested in his phone. The receptionist, who had heard everything, gave me a subtle thumbs up when I caught her eye. My physical therapist called me in shortly after, and I could still see that guy shifting uncomfortably in his new seat as I walked past. Maybe next time he'll think twice before judging someone's coping mechanisms. Later during my session, my physical therapist mentioned that she had overheard the whole thing in the lobby. She told me that this wasn't the first time that particular patient had made other people uncomfortable in the waiting room. Apparently, he was known for being overly chatty and judgmental with other patients, especially younger ones. She assured me that they would make a note to seat him separately from other patients in the future. As I was leaving after my session, I noticed he was still in the urgent care waiting area. This time he was sitting alone in the corner, deliberately avoiding eye contact with everyone. The receptionist quietly told me that he'd been oddly silent since our encounter and hadn't tried to strike up a conversation with anyone else. Sometimes it takes being called out to realize how inappropriate your behavior is. I felt a small sense of satisfaction knowing that maybe I'd helped make the waiting room a more peaceful place for future patients. I never wanted any of this to happen. We moved to this country when my son was just 14, hoping to give him better opportunities than what we had back home in Colombia. My brother helped us settle here, got us started with a small business, and made sure we were comfortable. Well, let's just say he's connected to some powerful people back home, but that's never been our world. We've always tried to live honestly. My son, he's always been the kind one. Takes after his late father that way. He's 17 now, and I've never had trouble with him at school. Until last week, that is. It started when he saw these three seniors bullying a freshman girl behind the gymnasium after school. They were making fun of her clothes, calling her poor, telling her she didn't belong at their fancy school. My son was heading to his bus when he heard them. I asked him gently to tell me everything that happened. He explained that he couldn't just walk away. He described how they were pulling at her backpack, dumping her books in the mud while she was crying. He told me how he stepped in, told them to back off. The girl managed to run away during the confrontation. That's when things got ugly. He told me how the biggest one had called him immigrant trash, telling him he should have minded his own business. They followed him when he tried to leave, cornered him before he could reach the main road. 3 of them against my boy. They beat him badly, took his phone so he couldn't call for help, and left him there on the side of the road. A passing driver found him an hour later and called an ambulance. 2 broken ribs, a concussion. His face, I couldn't recognize my beautiful boy's face when I got to the hospital. The school principal called me to his office the next day. He gave me the usual speech about taking allegations seriously, but then started making excuses about needing concrete evidence. I reminded him that my son was in the hospital, that these boys were known bullies, and that the girl they were harassing had seen everything. The principal just kept making excuses, saying that the girl denied any knowledge of the incident and that the accused students came from very prominent families. He insisted they needed to be certain before making any accusations. I was going to go to the police. That's when my brother found out. He flew in from Colombia that same night. I've never seen him so angry. My brother was furious, declaring that nobody touches his nephew. When I suggested letting the authorities handle it, he scoffed. He pointed out how useless that would be, suggesting the principal was probably getting his pockets lined by those families. He insisted there were other ways to handle this. I begged him not to do anything drastic. But my brother, when he sets his mind to something, 3 days later those boys' parents received packages. Inside were photos of their precious sons beating my boy, security camera footage from nearby buildings, cell phone videos from witnesses who were too scared to come forward before. Along with those came other photos, their sons at parties with drugs, drunk driving, bullying other kids, years of evidence of their behavior. My brother didn't hurt anyone, and he didn't have to. He just made sure those families understood exactly what would happen if every bit of evidence was sent to the police, the school board, and the local news stations. How their college acceptances would disappear, how their parents' reputations would crumble. The next day, all 3 boys were withdrawn from school. Their families suddenly announced they were moving to different states. The principal resigned, citing personal reasons. The girl my son helped, she finally came forward. Turns out those boys had been terrorizing half the school, but nobody dared to speak up because of their family's influence. My son is healing now. He's back at school, and people treat him differently. With respect, but also with a little fear. They whisper about what happened to those boys, make up wild stories about Colombian cartels and midnight disappearances. None of it's true, of course. My brother just reminded those families that money and influence work both ways. I still wish we could have handled it through proper channels. But when I see my son sleeping peacefully now, no longer jumping at sudden noises or having nightmares, maybe sometimes justice needs a little push in the right direction. I'm currently 32 weeks pregnant with my first child. My husband and I had been trying for almost 2 years before we finally got our positive test, so every appointment with my midwife feels special even if it's just a routine checkup. I've been going to the same medical center since the beginning of my pregnancy, and honestly, the staff there has been nothing but wonderful. That particular morning, I wasn't feeling my best. Morning sickness had decided to make an unwelcome comeback, and my back was killing me. I threw on my most comfortable gray hoodie and black sweatpants. You know, the kind of outfit that screams, I'm pregnant, and comfort is my only priority right now. When I arrived at the medical center, the main waiting room was busier than usual. I checked in at the reception and was told to provide a urine sample before my appointment, which is pretty standard procedure. As I made my way to the restroom, I had to pass through this smaller waiting area where two elderly men were sitting. Just as I was walking past them, holding my sample jar, which was empty thankfully, one of them called out to me. He asked if they needed to wait to be called through for their appointments. I apologetically explained that I didn't work there. Now this is where it got weird. Instead of just apologizing like a normal person would, this man turned to his friend with this really condescending look on his face. He repeated to his friend that I didn't work there, his voice dripping with sarcasm, like I had personally offended him by not being an employee. His friend just sat there looking uncomfortable. His friend quietly suggested that maybe they should just wait, but the first old man wouldn't have it. He complained that someone should be there to tell them these things, and that they couldn't be expected to just sit there. I was already dealing with pregnancy hormones and nausea, and this guy's attitude was the last thing I needed. I went to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, and on my way back I could hear him still complaining to his friend about the service. As I passed him again, he actually had the nerve to speak louder, clearly trying to get my attention, making a snide comment about how they should have proper staff around to help people. I kept walking, pretending I couldn't hear him, but then I stopped, turned around, and walked back to the waiting area. My hormones and mounting frustration got the better of me. I explained again that I didn't work there, emphasizing that I was a patient just like him, pregnant and there to see my midwife. I pointed out that if he needed assistance, there was a reception desk right around the corner with actual staff members who could help. He shot back that I could have said that in the first place instead of being so rude. I challenged his definition of rudeness, reminding him that I had simply told him I didn't work there, while he was the one making sarcastic comments to his friend about me. I also pointed out the obvious, that I was wearing casual clothes and carrying a urine sample, questioning what made him think I was staff. At this point, a nurse who had overheard the commotion came over and asked if everything was all right. The old man tried to complain about me, but I cut him off, explaining to the nurse how I was just a patient trying to get to my appointment while being harassed by someone who couldn't accept that not every person in a medical center was an employee. The nurse gave the old man a disapproving look and professionally, but told him that while she was happy to help him, she wouldn't tolerate him harassing other patients. She reminded him that the reception desk was clearly marked and staffed with people available to answer questions. The old man's face turned red, and his friend looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Without another word, the old man got up and walked toward the reception desk, leaving his embarrassed friend behind. I went on to have my appointment, which went great. My baby's heartbeat was strong, and all my tests came back normal. When I left the medical center later, I noticed both men were gone, but the nurse who had helped me gave me a knowing smile as I walked past the desk. After losing both my parents in a car accident 2 years ago, I've been doing my best to keep our family home and take care of my younger brother, who's still in college. The daytime job I had wasn't cutting it anymore with the rising costs of everything, so when I saw the overnight position offering a 25% shift differential, I jumped at the opportunity. The job itself isn't bad. I work in a warehouse doing inventory management. The quiet of the night shift usually suits me just fine, and most of my co-workers tend to keep to themselves, which is exactly how I like it. That was until this new guy started on the same day as me. From the moment he walked in, he's been like a shadow I never wanted. You know the type. Someone who thinks that working the same shift means we have to be best friends. He follows me around during breaks, tries to sync his lunch with mine, and worst of all, he never stopped stalking. Last night was annoying. He cornered me while I was doing inventory in the back section and started firing off questions like he was conducting a census. First, he asked about my age. When I told him it was personal, he tried to act all friendly, sharing that he was 34 and calling us work buddies. I finally gave in and told him I was 32 just to get him to stop pestering me about it, but that only encouraged him. He immediately launched into questions about whether I was married or had any kids. I gave him short no answers to both, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, he got excited about the fact that I was single, even throwing in a creepy wink. I tried to focus on scanning the boxes, but he wouldn't let up. He pressed on about my living situation, asking if I had my own place. I kept it brief and just said, I lived with family. That's when his whole demeanor changed. His face twisted into this smug expression that made me want to throw my scanner at him. He had the nerve to act all condescending, expressing his shock that someone in their 30s would still be living with their parents. The way he said it, like he'd just discovered some embarrassing secret, made something snap inside me. I stopped scanning, turned to face him directly, and told him that yes, technically, I did live with my parents. They were in the pretty box on the fireplace. All that smug superiority drained away in an instant, replaced by this pale, shocked expression. He stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Then he just turned and walked away. For the next couple of hours, it was wonderfully peaceful. He stayed on the opposite side of the warehouse, and I could finally focus on my work without 20 questions being fired at me every 5 minutes. When we did cross paths later, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, but honestly, I was just happy he'd finally learned to keep his distance. Word must have gotten around to our other co-workers, because now everyone gives me exactly the space I need. Sometimes the best way to deal with nosy people is to give them an answer they're not prepared for. I still catch him watching me sometimes from across the warehouse, but as soon as I look his way, he quickly finds something else to do. I'd feel bad about making him uncomfortable, but after all his intrusive questioning and judgmental attitudes, I think he earned this little lesson in minding his own business. The supervisor even pulled me aside last week to tell me my productivity numbers were among the highest on the night shift. Turns out you can get a lot more done when you're not being interrogated every 5 minutes. The nosy guy's numbers, on the other hand, have apparently been suffering, probably because he spends too much time trying to avoid crossing paths with me. I heard that he's been asking about transferring to the day shift. Part of me hopes he gets it, not just for my peace and quiet, but because maybe next time he'll think twice before judging someone's living situation without knowing their whole story. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.